Okay, so after going over the list of projects that were listed on that website our professor gave us, I ended up picking one under the title of memory techniques. And what I had to essentially do was conduct 3 different experiments on around 8 to 20 participants. I only ended up doing 7 because, I didn't really have much people to go around, but which I found okay because it followed the same pattern, so I didn't really have to go look for anybody else. Actually, it felt like the pattern was gonna keep constant, and so I had to make a list of 15 numbers, which I have here, and for the first memory technique, I had to visually show them the numbers and give them a minute to memorize them, and so after a minute, I would have them recite them back to me and see how many they can recall. Now for the second memory technique, which is auditory, the hearing senses, I would do the same thing, but instead of showing them the paper, I would just say the numbers out loud and for a minute see how many they can remember that way. Now for the third technique, it was just a little bit different. I had it actually involved both the visual and the auditory. So for that one, I had same thing. I would show them the paper, read them out loud, and actually they had to write them down on a piece of paper as they heard it and as they saw it. Kind of like the way we learn in school, like we're sitting down in the class or whatever, and our professor talks about the terminology, explains it. You hear what the word sounds like, and you also write it down. Kind of like the same principle. And so, to get into the graph real quick, because I found out that 5 minutes is not enough. I had to make a hypothesis actually before I get into the data here. I had to make a hypothesis as to what I thought was going to yield better results. And for me, from I guess previous understanding from what we learned in class about memory, because that's actually something we talked about. For me, it felt like the third technique was going to yield better results because it actually involves more than one sense. So in a way, it felt like it was kind of obvious to me, and so that's what I have hypothesized. And so to get into the graph real quick, right here on the left side, we have numbers from 1 to 15, which represents the number of numbers I had created. Over here on the bottom, I have the first letter of each person's name. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people here, and this is their data. To get into the graph now, we see red represents the visual, which is actually also called iconic if you reference it back to our psychology book or whatever. Now the black is auditory, which is the smaller ones right here, which is also called mycoic memorization, just to the hearing, the listening. And blue over here represents both, the third technique, which uses both, and as well as hands-on, kind of like a mind-body connection. And so, well, actually, before I go into all this right here, let me tell you what memory is. Memory is actually the mental process that happens within your brain of acquiring information from your exterior world through your senses, through storing it from your short-term memory into your long-term memory, as well as retrieving the information. So it goes from senses, short-term, long-term. That's pretty much how it goes. Now to get into the graph here, we see that for the auditory, the echoic memorization, it actually had the worst results. You see this in black right here, actually the low ones. And I think the reason being is because we really don't have anything to reference things to, as far as like mental pictures and stuff like that. For example, for the iconic, the visual experiment, they actually were able to recall a lot more numbers. And I think the reason being is because when you visualize something, you actually create a mental picture that when you're trying to memorize, I believe, you can you can go back into the mental picture and have something to recall. So I think that's why you're able to recall a little bit more numbers. Whereas, listening, you don't really have that. You don't really have anything to reference to. Although you can actually create a song or something which creates like a beat that you can later on recall. But in this case, they didn't really have time to actually create a song or something with all those numbers. So I think that's why we had a lot worse results with the auditory. Now for the third technique, which is both the visual and the auditory, we see that they all actually recalled a lot more numbers. Well, actually, more than the visual and the auditory. And I think the reason being is because they're more involved. They're not only are they using more senses, physical senses as far as the visual and the hearing, but they're actually more concentrating what they're doing. So they're listening, they're seeing it, and they're also actually writing down. So it's like a mind-body connection. And I feel like the more concentrated you are, the more likely you're able to recall something. And so that's actually what I had. My hypothesis from the very beginning was that the third technique was going to be the best one. Again, because we actually talked about it in class, and I think that's why I was able to make this prediction, was because we talked about in class how concentration plays a big role in getting things done and memorizing things and stuff like that. We went into like meditation and stuff like that. But that's pretty much what I found out through this experiment, this project I conducted. I guess we're not very good listeners, and we're better. We learn or memorize things better visually. And I guess that's it.